Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Sound Advice Podcast. I am your host, Gino Medina, and just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started today. Coming up on future episodes, we are going to review some moderately priced gear that is targeted for working musicians like ourselves. And we're going to be very brutally honest with these reviews. Guitars, basses, amplifiers, whatever we can get our hands on, we're going to put to the test, and we'll let you know the verdict, and you can make a decision as to whether or not you want to give those products a try. So look out for that series coming up soon on the podcast. But today we have a very special guest, my dear friend Adam Gust. He is a session and touring drummer, originally from Minnesota, and he has been in the Los Angeles area for the last 20 years. He has had a myriad of experiences that has not only reshaped his playing, but his approach to drums, and he is here to share that with us today. So there's a lot of ground to cover. It's a great episode. Some of the content I did have to edit out for this platform, but soon we will have bonus content for subscribers. That'll be coming up soon, so look out for that. In the meantime, stick around and check out this conversation with drummer Adam Gust. Everybody say hello. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me from Los Angeles, please welcome session drummer extraordinaire. Give it up for Mr. Adam Gust. Adam, how you doing, my man?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing great. How about you, Gino?
So far, so good. It has been a long time since we've spoken.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've been up to quite a bit of stuff from what I can tell. Can you just kind of give me a little background of what you've been up to in the last several years since we've seen you?
Yeah, we played in the late 90s together, and I moved to LA in 2000. I remember Y2K happened, and the world didn't blow up, and I was like, what the hell? May as well make the plunge. So, yeah, I moved out here, and it's been a roller coaster. Lots of ups, lots of downs. Had some high highs and low lows, and but looking back, it makes for an interesting story, I guess. So I guess that's a good thing.
So you've been in Los Angeles for the better part of 20 years. So in the 20 years that you've been there, you've had to build these relationships to be able to get busy and stay busy working, doing session work and gigging and stuff like that. Did you have a specific process in mind when you got there, or did you already have like a built-in network when you got to Los Angeles? I guess the short question is, why Los Angeles?
Yeah, honestly, the weather is a factor. I had friends who moved to New York, and they would talk about the winters. And after spending 20 years in Minnesota, I've kind of punched the card on that one. I don't really want to be in the freezing cold anymore. So, yeah, I definitely was attracted. And my brother lived in LA as well.
Oh, okay, so I thought maybe it was just the Tom Brady syndrome. Take me to Tampa and let's, Southern California boy does good,
Another
fans.
factor, you probably maybe you remember that when we were playing together, I was a huge Keith Carlock fan, and he had just moved to New York. And I remember, he was just tearing it up in New York. He was there 6 months and was playing with Steely Dan, and I was kind of like, yeah, maybe I'll go to LA. It's like my favorite drummer is already there.
That's fun.
He's got it covered.
Yeah, I think that's funny you said that. I saw Steely Dan at Chastain Amphitheater in Atlanta.
Awesome.
And pound for pound, that is the best collection of musicians. I'd say the best band, but I think every time they go out, they have a different group of people. And Keith Carlock did the drum solo, which I knew he would do, and I kept looking forward to it. And the whole time he played, I thought about you the whole time, because he just, stylistically, the way he played just reminds me of how you play. And so it's not a surprise to me that he's, your favorite drummer, one of your biggest influences. But he plays with this really fluid motion, and it reminded me of what you had referred to back in the day as the 3D drumming technique. Can you tell me about the origins of the 3D drumming technique and how that's evolved over time?
Yeah, the origins of it were sound, space, and time when I thought about it, because I was always thinking about these isolated exercises that could make you a better drummer, a better musician. And I noticed, if I would work on one thing, it would ultimately affect something else. And so it's hard to get granular on things when it's kind of in a boat and you work on one thing and again, things shift and wait. And so I started really trying to draw the parallels with how sound, how your sound sounds, how your environment, how you move around the space at the drums, and then how your time feels and how space affects time, how space affects sound, and all these are related to each other. And so that was kind of the idea behind it.
So you kind of have a new age approach to drumming in that it's not just how technically proficient you are, how you can execute something as simple as a 4 on the floor or cover maybe a Zappa tune. It's not just about execution. It sounds like to me your whole approach is a mind-body approach to the relationship to the instrument that you're playing, like connecting on, I don't want to say cosmic level, but I don't know what else to call it, with your instrument, and not just the only connection being between your hands and the sticks and the drums. Has that always been the basis of your approach to drums?
That's the ideal. I've had some experiences throughout my career where I felt like I was bigger, a part of something bigger than myself. And those were the musical moments that stood out to me, where there was some sort of flow happening, like something was coming from my heart and it was coming out in my sound of the instrument, and it was being augmented by other musicians in the band. And when it would come back to me, it kind of felt like I was hearing my own heart involved in this community,
That's a pretty cool way of looking at
music. Yeah, and I noticed that was it. I felt like there was like this feedback loop, this kind of transcendent sensation thing. And I like, man, what do you do to get that more? It was like drugs to me. I like, man, anything I can do to make that feedback loop happen, to connect me being the conduit as the drummer with the other musicians being the conduit to the band. And
that sounds...
anything that can...
go ahead. I was just going to say that sounds much more philosophical than what I've been thinking. That moment when you can... It's very visceral in the sense, when you're with a collection of people and you're jamming on stage and everything gels. Those moments, I think that might be what you're referring to, just on a much deeper level. But you just have a much more eloquent way of putting it.
Well, I have been thinking about it a lot. And actually, 3D drumming was an instructional series I was working on before 2010, which was a pretty pivotal year for me. And so I had a perspective of how I felt education affected musicians, and it's definitely changed a lot in the last 10 years. So 3D drumming was a moment in time for me, and more recently I've come across some different ways to facilitate this transcendent feedback loop. I like to think of music like, fulfilling our role in the group sound, so that when we hear it back, we really feel part of a community, feel part of something larger than ourselves, which I think is really absent from drum education in general. Like, I dare you to go on YouTube and find anything that tries to tell drummers how to be part of a bigger, group than themselves to create this sort of transcendent sound. And I think that people who try to talk about it, it ends up coming off somewhat, I don't know, a little esoteric, a little hard to explain. and so I don't want to be guilty of that either. So I've just really been careful to try to have hundreds of systematic ways of reaching that. Like, I think it's great to approach something from a cosmic level. Yeah, like you said it. But it's great to do that. But if you don't have these like really fundamental, tangible ways of accessing that, then it's all kind of neither here nor there. So that's been really loving our practice is the drum education program that I've been working on. And it's just very systematic ways of accessing those things that are far beyond us as individuals.
There's something really spiritual about that kind of approach. I was looking at the outline of the distillery, loving our practice.
Oh, cool.
And it seems like the sort of thing, if you can really get the hang of it, like a yoga master gets into yoga and they're very conscientious of their breathing and just connected with their body, like somatic intelligence, I think is what you refer to it as. That practice of being very conscientious of your body's response to the musical environment. I think bassists and guitarists and keyboard players as well can benefit from taking that approach. But when you find yourself with a group of other musicians, do you feel like some of them already just have an innate or an intrinsic understanding that music is connective tissue and it can provide a sense of community? And so do you find yourself having to educate musicians when you're in a new situation to that approach? How do you share that with other musicians at a gig setting, I guess would be one way to ask that question.
Yeah, that's very case dependent. The ideal would be that everyone approaches it the same, and it happens. That is, wow, the moments that happened, I am incredibly grateful for. Educating anyone in a band on how I think they should behave is inherently flawed. It's dangerous. It kind of, it kind of makes you the asshole in a certain degree. And so I approach it kind of in two different scenarios. One where there's a band that exists and you're meant to fulfill the role as drummer for them and they're hiring you. And in that situation, all I can do is my best. I mean, I can
Sure.
just come at it with the philosophy that works for me and whatever. And, maybe there are Christians, atheists, whoever, spiritually speaking or philosophically speaking, they're all different. And I just try to fulfill my role and integrate. Integrate's a big part of just integrate into what's necessary and have the cognitive empathy and compassionate empathy to know what they might need from me. I think that's the best way to approach a situation like that. And there are lots of strategic ways to approach compassionate empathy as well. And so, compassionate empathy is the idea that, okay, cognitively and emotionally, I understand what these people are feeling in a given situation. And the compassion part of it is I know what I need to do in order to give them what will facilitate greatness with them.
Gotcha.
And man, people who have that ability, they are valuable in any given situation. Business, politics, music, whatever. Somebody who can register cues from somebody emotionally and cognitively, and then take that in and give them what they need. That's as far as any advice I would have for a sideman musician is figure out yourself some goddamn compassionate empathy, because that goes a long way, and it really gets you out of your own hangups. Because instead of worrying about, oh, is this doing for me what I want, and am I fulfilling the role necessary? And it cancels all that internal dialogue and just focuses it on me making these people happy to try to get to that feedback place. And even if you don't get there, at least you gave the people what they wanted, and the check will cash, hopefully.
Well, yeah, no kidding. As long as that clears up. No. You bring up a good point. Going in a situation like that, you could lead by example. I think people, especially people who are a little more sensitive to their surroundings and can read social cues better, I think they'll pick up on that sort of behavior. Like, oh, Adam's on this gig, great, oh, he's a great drummer. And that has its merit. But then there's the vibe that you bring. The addition or subtraction of any one person in any ensemble changes the entire chemistry of the whole group. And so you coming in there with your mindset and trying to achieve the goals you want to achieve, people who can pick up on those social cues are going to follow suit, I think, especially if you work with the same musicians over and over again. So you build a nice little network of musicians. But it all comes down, again, you're still establishing relationships. It's not just music. So somebody picks up on your vibe, they kind of get more in tune to the visceral aspects of performing and find those magical moments, And then they may not go, oh, on a philosophical level, X, Y, Z, but they're going to remember how good it felt. And they're going to call you again when they need a drummer. So it seems like that just feeds itself in that respect. Do you find that that's consistent?
Consistent in how I've approached professional situations? I wish I could say yes. I feel like I've really became a different person after this incident in 2010. There was this injury that really changed how I view myself and life. And so I guess now I just see the best thing that I could have done looking back is to really just try to make people happy with what I'm doing, and not in a sense of being like a people pleaser, but being able to over deliver in the sense of seeing past the immediate moment of what somebody needs. Like if you're able to tell what somebody will need in a minute, in 5 minutes, in a day, in those kind of increments, those people will feel that. They're like, wow, okay, this guy somehow is able to know what I'm going to want before I know I want it. It's like that. I want that person. I want that person in a relationship, in a profession, in anything. And so there are some systematic ways to educate ourselves in how to be more empathetic. And there are 5 empathies as far as I'm concerned. There's the emotional aspect of it, just like registering facial or body language cues, and you're able to tell if somebody can feel, okay, you empathize with that. Then there's cognitive. I can kind of tell what the person's thinking, given the circumstances. This is probably what's going through their mind for who they are. And then compassion fuses those two, and you're able to know what you can do, what you can help them with, and facilitate greatness. That's kind of a moniker for me, like facilitating greatness in others. If you can do that, you are like MVP,
That's
Jordan's game. He came into the NBA with all these mad skills, but he couldn't bring his team. He couldn't raise them up. But once he figured out, well, okay, if I hold back a little bit of my own expression, and then the team then they win 6 championships. And I think that's like really building off those 2 fundamentals, emotional and cognitive, and that builds the compassion. There's another one that's tactical empathy, which is top moments where you don't necessarily like who you're working with, but you still want to be empathetic.
Sure.
And that's really even beyond compassion, because you kind of have to protect your own integrity but still provide the service. Like, I've definitely worked with people I didn't like, and I had to be empathetic without letting that drag me down. And then if you can work on all those, then self-empathy. Then that's when you really get in touch with yourself and what you need, when you're able to see it in others. And I wish that I had that when I moved to LA. I was so conscious of myself and what am I getting out of this and how am I sounding. And so it's really, when I was stepped back from it.
Yeah, I think intrinsically we focus so much on the individual. We're all about individualism in the United States. And it takes a great deal of selflessness to be able to take the approach that you are taking now. My understanding since the accident in 2010, not only have you relearned how to play drums, I suppose, but you've had a paradigm shift in thinking.
Yeah, things that were crucially important to me before my accident, now I don't care less about. So, and like things that are hyper important to me now, if you would have told me in 2009, I would have been like, who are you talking about? You know, it's not me. So it's almost treating them like different people. I think like if you can step into your skin in your past and just know that that person was a different person, I think if you can make your internal dialogue, like we all talk to ourselves.
Sure.
And I've gone through some periods where I've had some really negative self-talk, and for varying reasons that I'm more aware of now. But I mean, I think it becomes more nurturing, your self-talk, if you can talk to yourself at different points in your life. Like, okay, well, I didn't know things in 2009 that I know now. Instead of calling myself an asshole or an idiot or you're fucking worthless or I don't know, whatever, I could think of it more like, oh man, you know, if you just knew this, if you could just like shift that little thing, you know, a few degrees, like your trajectory could just go so much further. Yeah. And so I think it's a little more supportive to think of it that way.
Yeah, I heard, and I don't know who it was, maybe Bill Maher. It's hard to blame somebody for not being woke when woke wasn't a thing. And you can't beat yourself up looking backwards. Like, oh yeah, I was the a-hole. And I can think of plenty of gigs where I was the a-hole at the gig. And I could beat myself up for them. Or I could have learned from those experiences and continued. You take a look at at yourself and you do some self-reflection. Sometimes it's self-imposed. Sometimes it's some event that occurs that forces us to reevaluate. You and I have that in common. We both have had traumatic hand injuries. For me, it changed my playing style, and it awakened a determination in me to get back to the level of musicianship I thought I was already at. I'm never going to get to where I want to be, but I'm always going to try. So when you were relearning drums, you learned not only new approaches, but you've integrated those new approaches into educating students. Is that correct? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How different is your approach to teaching now as a result of your experience over the last 10 years from the 10 years before that?
I would say it's upside down. It's like it's a 180 approach, because there was all the drum instruction stuff I was aware of, that I was a consumer of, that I spent my resources on, time and money. And looking back on it, I really feel like a lot of it was just intended as marketing for whoever that person was. Like I'm sure you can you've been at some clinics or watched instructional videos where I'm getting the impression from this moment right now that this person's more concerned with seeming cool or making me think that they're, you know, awesome than they really are in me learning something. And so student-based learning is a big shift for me. And Tommy Igoe, I really like what he's doing with it. There's a drummer, Dave Elich, who is applying some kind of body-centered techniques to drumming. Alexander technique, which is somewhat similar to somatic intelligence. It has some crossover. I think these things are definitely coming at it from, there's something that students need to know about themselves in order to really take advantage of the wealth of information that's online now.
I remember asking you when we were working together back in the 90s, how you got to be so goddamn good. I remember that first rehearsal, the first song we played together was that Wild Cherry song, Play That Funky Music. And we were in that rehearsal space that had the mirror on the walls. And so if you had looked in the mirror after 1, 2, 3, 4, as soon as you were in there, it didn't even take you 4 beats to settle in. You were on it. And I was just hoping to God you couldn't see our faces in the mirror, because I was just that close to just losing it and going insane, because it was just so badass. It was funny.
Oh, right on.
But you had said, I asked you, how'd you get to be so goddamn good? And your response was, man, you just really gotta love to play. And I love to play. And this is in the 90s when you had said that to me. And then in preparing for this interview or this discussion, I prefer to call it a conversation. When I watched your video where you were very open and very honest about your experience back in 2010, you had said that you didn't even enjoy playing because of the deficits that you were aware of as a result of what you experienced. Are you back to the place where playing is as much fun for you as it was back then?
I want to use my favorite word. It's even funner.
Funner. I like funner.
It has such a childlike quality to it. It's like, oh, it's even funner. You know, I guess anything that can make you feel like a kid again is, man, you got to freaking file that away and make sure that's in your back pocket when you can whip that out whenever you need it. And so, I mean, that's like, man, during COVID, I feel so blessed right now that my goal the last 10 years is to have looked at my accident as a teacher and to look at it as like, really, I'm better off that it did happen. And there's this sense of, if you can make your best or your worst day your best, that's like a successful life. That's what the strongest people in history have done. They take their worst day and they turn it into their best. And so that's what I've been trying to do. And I've really felt the success of that during COVID, because a lot of musicians I know that are really down about not getting to play with each other.
Right.
And now, while I do miss that, I feel like I'm on such a high level of accessing joy in my playing that I don't necessarily miss it. I mean, I practice every day for hours, and I've like, man, my accident just gave me that power to be able to love drumming even more. Now that I'm pushing 50, I feel like I loved it as much as I did when I was 18.
You just took what was a colossal problem and turned it into a solution.
Yeah, I can say in all sincerity that I'm glad it happened. I mean, it was the worst thing that happened to me. It brought me to the darkest moments in my life, but they were things, those darkest moments were things that were always there, but they were just below the surface, and they were always eating at me, but I was always living above a level of threshold of happiness that I felt like, I can put those aside. I don't need to worry about my demons, you know. But when you take a hit, like, not only do you have to recover from that hit, but you got to deal with your demons. Like, because now that you're at this lower threshold of where you want to be, you're down there in the murky shit, you know.
Right.
Well, that's different for all of us. And for me, it had a lot to do with imposter syndrome and stuff about my family and my stuff about myself as a man, kind of gender roles, masculinity. There were some thing, and there's this thing in somatic experiencing and somatic intelligence. It's a concept that, well, shit. Maybe I'll have to ask you to edit this out because I lost my train of thought on it.
I got your back.
Sorry, I know editing sucks. Fix it in post.
Yeah.
But
that's funny. I might leave that in.
Yeah, but I guess it has to do with the mind being privileged. I mean, I think we all raise like mind over matter, you know, strong mentally. And I mean, like, I think therefore I am, the Renaissance, or in human history, the mind has really been exalted, that cerebral cortex that separates us from the animals. And I think a lot of focus in our society is put on that. It's like our being strong mentally. Mm-hmm. And having a strong body has a lot more to do with architecture, like the muscles and skeleton, rather than our organs and our sensation, which is a little... And I feel like that privilege that's given to the mind, it doesn't deserve that privilege. And I think that's sort of like the microcosm microcosm of a lot of privileges that are not deserved in how society turned out. So that disconnection between mind and body is a real problem that I dealt with. Like when I had my accident, I realized that there was a huge amount, there was a tiny bit of suffering going on in myself under the surface in my subconscious, but it was expanded over such a long period of time from being 5 years old that it results in a lot of suffering. It's funny, like I would rather, like something that's 5% like detrimental to you, but it happens for 30 years. I mean, that sum total is
it's like a cumulative injury. Like just you keep tapping on the table, you're gonna mess up your knuckles.
that's a big deal, because like somebody who has something horrible happen, but they're back to 100% in a year. I mean, as far as the sum total, that's a smaller amount of suffering than somebody who struggles with a small demon, their whole life. And so I realized, man, when my injury took me down off my pedestal I felt I was on, I really had to deal with shit that was nagging me. And I'm better off now for it, for sure.
Yeah, I like you're saying, I agree with you. I think the mind, there's a reverence that it's continually held in many circles, medical circles and otherwise. There's a symbiotic relationship between the mind and the body. I mean, they're dependent on each other. It's not just symbiotic. I mean, they're dependent on each other. And when people get to a point where when they're in tune with both the mental and the physical parts of themselves, I think they're on their way of becoming a more complete person. And I also think that helps bridge the gap between whatever significant events you may have experienced as a youngster or a teenager or whatever, being able to close the gap between understanding, oh, this is why I do X, Y, and Z, and then to being able to change those behaviors, you got to be able to link the two, the mind and the body. Otherwise, you get half the problem figured out, but you never really get the whole solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's completely it.
Again, referring back to the video, I saw that you read it multiple times, but the body keeps the score.
Brilliant piece of work.
It's funny how you can go through these experiences, and we're smart enough to put a lot of stuff together, but sometimes we just need that little extra insight to get all of it together to make sense. And it seems like you had that experience with your accident, and the healing process, even though it's been 10, 11 years now, you're still healing from that. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you're behind the kit now and you feel this level of joy that you've not felt before, does that ever creep back into your playing? Do you ever feel the deficit between what you feel like you should be capable of? Like, in other words, do you still feel like you have a ways to go on that journey?
Ways to go. Yeah. Well, I mean, you said it earlier, like you're never there. You're never at the destination.
Oh, I just meant as an awesome player.
Yeah. But I guess I like to talk about this idea of resources. Because I mean, when you're faced with a big problem, I mean, if you like stare it in the face and it's like, looking at Everest, I mean, you're just like, holy shit, how, what the hell am I going to do? But but if you've trained for it, and if you have educated yourself and you have tools and you start really focusing on your understanding of how to use the tools, then it's a complete game changer. And I feel like the way I was educated, I was not given any resources to deal with the failure that I had when I had my injury. Like, there was nothing. And I mean, even with people who were helping me to heal physically from it, they weren't helping me with the resources that I needed either until I went to a therapist. And I like, why is that? It's like, well, I think it has a lot to do with the mind being privileged. I mean, everyone's like, okay, this is my area of expertise. I know that I can use acupuncture, I can use physical therapy, I can give it, but there was never any thought to like the psychology of recovering from my physical problem that I have, this nerve damage in my right hand that still exists. And so it took me 7 years to realize that the main issue I was having with my recovery was psychological. I would feel this disconnect in my thumb that wasn't there before, and it would trigger the moment of my accident, which, was very overwhelming. And I mean, I'd be playing a festival or being at Capitol Records or playing the House of Blues, and my whole arm would just club up, like tension from my shoulder to my wrist. And I'd just be like, what the fuck? I mean, it's like, I know I have nerve damage. This is the nerve damage acting up. Okay, I need resources to get over this nerve damage. Okay, I've been taking acupuncture. I have some things I've been working out with a drum instructor on a relay. It never occurred to me that I was triggering the trauma of my accident. And so after I dealt, and Body Keeps the Score was huge. Terence Real, a brilliant psychotherapist author, he really tuned me into this idea of focusing on how memory lives in the body, which, is something that Bessel talks about.
Yep.
And just like psychosomatic is redundant. And it's so funny how, like, in a lot of medical circles, if something's psychosomatic, it's like a sort of it's just psychosomatic. It's all in your head. And it's such a stupid thing, because if it's in the head, it's in the body. And if it's in the body, it's in the head. And so it took me forever to realize that.
That's a good point you make. If it's in the body, it's in the head. If it's in the head, it's in the body. It sounds like you found all the right things at the right time, and it's brought you to where you are now. Are you still doing a lot of session work and gigging live?
Yeah, this is my studio, and so I'm back here all the time. So I've been augmenting stuff with some video editing jobs, and I have something coming up with a theater I'm doing some composition and sound effects for, but mostly it's recording drums for people. I have a few students.
Very cool.
Yeah, I had built this place as the teaching studio in mid-January. It's just a tough shed in the backyard, but it looks
like a cool place to hang out.
It's 10 by 10, and I feel like this is my little cell. I don't know. I spend all day here for the last year.
I don't have much. I got this cheap drum set Mario's neighbor gave him. It's a sound percussion. It's a sound percussion drum set. It's just something to bang on. And then over here I've got a Roland virtual kit. It's one of the mid-level ones. I got my keyboards, and of course I'm on my Mac, my little workstation. So I got my own little space too.
Great.
My own little slice.
Great. Yeah, it means a lot to me to have a place to go, because man, thank God for it, really. Because, it's funny, because I always thought, oh, man, if this accident hadn't happened, I could have blah, blah, blah. But now I'm thinking, oh, my God, if it hadn't happened and I hadn't have been forced to really dig deep and find these resources that I use every day now, the pandemic would have happened, and I would have been just taken down even worse than my accident. I don't know what I would have been doing now.
Well, it shouldn't be lost on anybody that you are the one who took control of your own situation. You were your own best advocate.
It's funny, you did say something about how things happening at the right time, and it took me 7 years to realize what my real tension problems were, to diagnose them as being psychological. So I've finally gone to a therapist and have her point out to me, like, oh, we only have a few, meetings together before I left on this 6-month ship gig. And she's like, I can't officially diagnose anything, but I can definitely say you have red flags for avoidance. And she had said, well, you had this life-changing accident that threatened your financial situation, professionally, personally. It affected your entire life. Well, who did you talk to about it? And I was like, why would I talk about it? It sucks to talk about it. She looked at me like, so in the 7 years since your accident, you've never spoken to anybody about the psychological impact of your accident? It's like, of course not. It sucks. I mean, and she was just like, oh my God, 7 years, So she recommended Bessel van der Kolk's book, and Terence Real and Brene Brown. And I went on this 6-month cruise ship gig where I worked 10 hours a week as an entertainer. And I just read books and journal. Yeah,
That's a lot of time for reflection, man.
I know, man. God, I journaled every day for hours. I put up all my notes all over my cabin. I mean, I got total. I kind of went out I was at that point. It was really a low point for me, and I was ready to fucking jump over the edge of the cruise ship and just be done with it if I couldn't figure it out. I mean, literally. And so, that was really why it doesn't feel like things happened at the right time for me. The right time would have been somebody like, Adam, you're a professional drummer, you have nerve damage, there's a physical and psychological trauma that you need to deal with. And then Terry Real talks about a third level of trauma that you need to deal with, and that's the trauma that's inflicted on your sense of masculinity. And that one really blew my mind. And
You're
his
talking
whole
about like
thing
things
on
like there's no
how,
crying in baseball, hold your chin up, that kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah. Well, what toxic masculinity, how it ultimately completely fucks up males as much as females, how it's just toxic for everyone, and
Give
how
me an
hyper
example of,
masculine.
if you don't mind, give me an example of some of the language that represents that.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'm all about making it granule. That's the rest of my life's work, is trying to break it down. So I think something we can all understand, the term is hypermasculine posturing. When I say that and you like sit with that and feel that, probably somebody comes to mind, or a moment
Yes,
comes to mind, or,
some cultural
and
things
so,
come to
okay, now
mind.
just like let that person or moment live in your mind for a little bit. Just kind of like see, but what does that memory make you feel like? And then now just imagine trying to teach that person or situation something, like having to learn something with this hypermasculine posturing going on, and you know that it's a train wreck. And so I think anything that you come to with some sense of like defending or upholding your own masculinity immediately cuts you off from learning it. And that's a huge deal. For me in my life, I've seen how that's gone wrong for me so many times. And now when I can approach it, I can feel like, okay, my masculinity is definitely intact, but I can let myself respect and be the learner and not the learned, and like really there's this like one thing Terry talks about, like take all that hyper masculine posturing energy you've been taught since you were a little kid, and imagine like taking it out of you and putting it in the chair next to you, and then just sit there. Now imagine wanting to learn something. Would you want that to be what learns, or would you want what's left to be what learns? And
That's a cool way to
what's
put it.
left is how we learn. Really not having that, man, if you're trying to maintain your masculinity while you're trying to learn something, or you're, learn, it's a clusterfuck.
Yeah,
And so I think like
how can you let anything
yeah,
in when your guard is up? Yeah, yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And
yeah.
it has everything. All that has to do is with what other people think. And so that Terry breaks it down in the sense of it's akin to narcissism, like you're kind of in love with this sense of yourself as a man. And all of us have had some moment where we were taught very clearly, like, do not do that. I can have a very specific memory of being 5 years old, and I did something, and that men do not do that, and that's the highest shame you can do, is to be a sissy or a pussy or any of
Yeah,
this awful.
apparently I hit a girl in first grade who was teasing me relentlessly, and my mom caught me. And she had always told me a gentleman never hits a woman or never hits a girl or something. It was that kind of language. And I don't remember this incident at all, but she remembers pulling up, and the girl was pushing me, and I pushed her back. But you're right; they being our elders, and of course the right thing to do is to not strike another person. Granted, but that's not acceptable behavior for a man, and nor should it be. I've been I've been asked many times if I'm straight or not. I'm animated, my voice is funny, whatever.
Yeah,
So I'm. The irony is, I've actually gotten quite comfortable in my skin as a result of all those questions, and those are the kind of questions that would usually, I think, put somebody on guard. And I was guilty of that too for a long time. It took me a while to get comfortable in my own skin, to be able to go, no, I'm not, or depending on my mood, I'm sexually ambiguous. But yeah, that's crazy, man. There's something else that you said with respect to playing, and I think this would be helpful for guys who are out there hustling for work. You had said you will only get as good as you feel. I think I knew where you were coming from for that, but will you explain to the listeners exactly what that means to you? And can you kind of give us a little background of how you discovered that connection between how good you can execute and how good you feel?
absolutely. Yeah, it's somatic intelligence. It's the essence of it as far as applying it to drum set. And as drummers require more somatic intelligence than anything. I brought up Michael Jordan earlier. Maybe Michael Jordan has as much somatic intelligence as the best drummer. It's like that's
As Keith
that's the level. Keyboard players, guitar players, it's all twiddling their fingers compared to what drummers have to do. I'm just kidding, but it's like I really think of the time that is necessary to put in to this instrument, and how much repetition and how much understanding of how all that our body functions affects our time and sound on the drums. Like, the only way that you're ever going to get good at the drums is if it feels good to practice. Because then the other side of that is you're kind of, if you don't feel good when you practice and you're practicing 20, 30 hours a week, then you're kind of a martyr. And that's like, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, because I know those people, those people who are like, oh, I'm suffering for my art. And, somehow they get some sense of higher than thou or some satisfaction from that. But it's bullshit. That's not sustainable. That's not something you're going to carry into your 50s and still feel good about what you're doing. And so I think with anybody really breaking it down to, okay, I need to feel good doing this, or I'm not going to do it, or I'm not going to do it well. And so really anything in the drums, the first thing I think about a drummer should do is just figure out how to get a straight stick path in the air. Because I mean, the minute you start hitting the surface and rebounding, you're already entering a whole level of physics that's well beyond your own somatic intelligence. Like, you got to walk before you can crawl. You got to add before you divide. But you have to just figure out how the sticks feel in the air before you get anywhere else. And what happens for a person who picks the stick? For the podcast, I have sticks in my hands and I'm moving them about right now. But there's a somatic intelligence idea that anything that is asymmetrical is automatically doubled in how it works in your system of your body. So let's say I do this and I notice, wow, there's some tension that's in my right hand that's not in my left. And so what that means is that your left hand is compensating, because there's bilaterally integrating asymmetry is this practice of tracking tension in the body. And so if you notice something that's asymmetrical, immediately, red flag. If I can fix this, I'm already twice as closer to any level of getting out, the heart through the mind, through the body, interfaced into the instrument, and get this idea of flow happening. So it's a somatic intelligence. Let's see, who's that? Betsy Politan has this really cool idea that she works with singers, which she says inhibiting your habitual tension. It makes it more active. It makes it more like you are at the forefront of this process. Like, you're actively inhibiting your tension habits.
This reminds me of the Benjamin Franklin quote I saw on your outline about about farting.
Yeah, I love it. Oh my God, that has everything to do with the somatic.
He's absolutely right. He is absolutely right.
It's so funny because at the time he was writing it to be kind of comedic, but at the same time he's like, all you motherfuckers are so uptight, we can't even talk about anything moving forward because we're all more worried about our farts stinking than we are about achieving any kind of desirable result. And that's exactly somatic intelligence. It's like, I mean, because no dog worries about their fart stinking, because they don't have a prefrontal cortex like humans do. And so that tension, the tension we have based on social needs or implications, it runs deep. It runs far deeper than any of us do. And I mean, this idea of toxic masculinity, at some point in all of our lives as men, we were taught something was a personal internal yearning that we wanted to do, but we were told it was shameful. So we cut that off. And that essentially split us into what we want to do as who we really are on the inside and how we are perceived on the outside. And oftentimes that's the conversation, that conversation between our hypermasculine posturing self and who we really are on the inside. And that's a dominant submissive conversation, because the hypermasculine posturing person always picks the higher ground. And so that's why a lot of us talk down to ourselves as men when we look in the mirror, when we're not in front of other people. That asymmetrical conversation, it's not friendship, it's lesser to greater.
It almost seems like it could be adversarial, like we're fighting internally amongst ourselves.
Your own worst enemy. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it comes from not knowing really who you are yet. It could be a number of reasons for any person. That's just kind of how it strikes me. And of course, if you're arguing with yourself internally, then it makes sense you'd be more likely to actually externalize those arguments with other people.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be in a tense situation, especially working musicians. You want to be a good hang if you're on the road with somebody. Yeah. You were a good guy to hang out with. I remember listening to salsa
Yeah.
music and making drum sounds. And I remember one gig we did in Bricktown Brewery where I think you were missing some hardware. And
Oh
and
shit!
I
Yep.
think it was just hi-hat, kick drum, and snare, and maybe your floor tom. I
I
don't know
was
if
missing the floor tom legs and the rack tom. So yeah, right. That's
so. It's
all I
just snare.
had was like, yeah.
I remember thinking, oh man, because I knew you could tear it up, and I love hearing you play. But I remember thinking at the end of the night, he still kicked all kinds of ass. Just playing on that strip down.
And then I thought, man, now I got even less shit to haul. Maybe this is a good idea.
Yeah, that could have been a learning experience all by itself. I said, hey, I got this corporate band that I work with called Hook. They're based out of Tulsa, and they have their own sound guy. All I got to do is show up with my guitar rig and wear the right clothes, show up on time, do the gig, and go. I have this little wagon and my in-ear guitar rack. We don't use amps or anything like that. I take 2 guitars, my guitar rack, my pedal board, and my guitar stands, and I put them in this wagon. And every single time I get done with the show, I'm torn down and ready to leave in 9 minutes. It takes me longer to change out of my gig clothes. It's like I just, and I'm ready to go home. I love that gig for that very reason.
Yeah. Awesome.
Plus, they're just badass musicians. The bass player went to North Texas, but I love that gig for that reason. I'm in and out of there so quick. I forgot what I was talking about. I was just so excited about
Oh,
that
no,
gig.
that's cool, man. You got to relish those moments because, yeah, there's so many moments where we sit around thinking how we aren't living up to what we want. And I think a lot of that comes from not appreciating those moments like you're describing. Like,
oh, man, I love playing. You shared the stage with me. You know how I get on stage. But there's something about finishing and getting home safely at the end of a long night. At my age, anyway. In my 20s, I didn't mind so much being out. But at my age, getting done with the gig, it's nice to just come home and chill. And it's a good feeling, man. Are you doing any session work for anybody these days? Like, do you got anything coming up? I know
yeah,
I just
there's
kind of
a ton of
took a left
Yeah,
turn.
a ton of stuff. There's a company, a theater company, Blood Run. They're doing a vampire musical that's been going on for a while. And so I've been doing the drums for it, and it's ended up being just dozens and dozens of cues. And they've asked me to shoot videos and Broadway singers to sing on the stuff, some names in Broadway. And then there's an album for a guy, Neil Kramer, I'm working on that's great. There's an artist, Fia Nix. Her album just went into mixing.
Wait, who's album?
And Fia Nix.
I thought you said Stevie Nicks. I was like, okay, you're holding out on me, dude.
Oh, no. Jimmy Paxton's got that job sewn up. He's a bad motherfucker. So, who else? Kyle Culkin. He's a singer, songwriter, producer. I've been doing a fair amount of stuff for. There's a Melrose Music keeps hiring me for stuff. And who else is there? Yeah, Oleg Bernoff from Red Elvises. He's working on a record, so I've been doing tracks for him.
You worked with the Red Elvises for a good while.
8 years. Oh my God, yeah, that band was a trip.
I think Marshall and I and Mario went to see you when you were touring with them once. I think you left tickets for us at a gig once. I seem to remember going to see you play with them. Yeah. How did that gig come about?
That gig, I was working for a violinist, Chris Murphy, and he had another drummer, Avi Sills. Then we were sharing gigs. And Avi was the previous drummer in Red Elvises, and he let me know that they were looking for somebody. So I auditioned and got the gig and started touring in 2001. I was in LA for a year and a half. And that was my first real touring gig. And every year they upped my salary. Every time I felt like, man, I've had enough of this, I should go. They'd give me a raise. I'd be like, whoa, yeah. And then we started touring Europe and Russia. We played to 30,000 people in Red Square for Live Aid in 2005. That was
an American in Red Square at the time. That's pretty cool.
I was the only. The headliner was the Pet Shop Boys. I think they were. They weren't American. They were British. And then our next gig was a pizza shop in Sacramento. Literally, we came home, and that was sort of the story of that band. It was something else. So I learned a lot from them.
We did a show. We played at the Coca-Cola Starplex when the Spice Girls were touring, and the next night at Liberty D's in Norman, playing for the staff because school was out. But it's a trip to play
Yeah.
for these thousands of people, and then the next night you're playing for the wait staff at a bar. But it's it's
Man,
crazy.
and it's like if you can engage your nervous system the best you can in both situations, that I think it's about playing the hand you're dealt. And I think you were bringing up earlier, like, what's a good way for a sideman to look at, their careers? And I mean, like, really, it's a little cliche, but it's absolutely true. Like the way you approach a gig playing to 30,000 people in Red Square should be the absolute same as playing at a pizza shop in Sacramento.
Well, what does that
And
look like for Adam? I mean, what does that preparation look like for you?
that has everything to do with somatic intelligence training. And so there's tension that exists in our body, and it's either habitual or intentional. I mean, it seems like it's either or. And so there's a great practice that for anything you do, the best thing you can do is eradicate your habitual tension and then bring it back and see which is better. Is it better if I do have this habitual tension, or is it better if I don't? And it's really an interrogation. I mean, I want to talk about every muscle fiber in your body.
You're talking about interrogation of the self, correct?
Yeah, man, really checking in with where is this tension? Is it benefiting me or is it not? And if it's not, get rid of it. And so, I mean, that's what my practice is right now, is doing things I can already do, but really trying to figure out, okay, when I move from high to ride, is there anything going on in my shoulder and my back and my arm? Is there anything that feels different when I move from here to here? Because what happens when you play that pizza shop and there's barely anyone giving a shit, when you make that move, there's a little bit of, tension there. It doesn't make that big a difference. But when you're on that stage in Red Square and your amygdala is freaking out, you're in kind of fight or flight, your mind
Your
is like,
adrenaline's
holy
going
shit,
nuts.
yeah, I mean, I was being televised worldwide. It's a huge crowd. And I'm just like, fuck, what happens to that habitual tension is it 10x's. And so it's like something that'll be super minor and barely recognizable in the practice room or at the pizza shop suddenly exacerbates when you're in these pressure situations. And it's because that your mind is firing so much that any little unnecessary tension just 10x's.
That reminds me, I saw a report on one of those news magazines, and they were talking about the importance of people being able to have firearms on them in case there's like an incident, like a theater shooting or something like that. And they were doing these experiments with like the shooting exercises like police officers do. And then they had some of the people who didn't have any training simulate these same scenarios. And in the situations where people were trained regularly to use firearms, they always performed much, much better. And by that, I mean the assailant in the demonstration was usually the only person who was injured in the mock shooting trying to end the situation. In the situations where an armed civilian was trying to neutralize a threat, more often than not, they actually caused injury to other civilians, extra collateral damage. So the importance of the constant prep and practicing and making those conscious motions and movements more instinctive or more automatic, I guess, is I'm going to edit this for sure. The more voluntary they are, fix it in post.
I love the word deliberate. If you act deliberately, it's almost better to do the wrong thing deliberately than the right thing inadvertently. I'm serious, because your life compounds on itself. And if you just keep getting lucky doing inadvertent things that are successful, it's actually worse than doing something deliberate and being wrong. Like, I really feel like if you're doing anything deliberately, it's inherently better than not.
So
a
life filled with happy accidents is not for you.
Well, happy accidents happen when you're doing something deliberately. This is much deeper than I'm explaining it right now. I have this idea of drumming from the inside out. And so when I say deliberate, I mean something that's from our heart. And so I think there's so many times there's things that are learned from the outside in rather than informed from the inside out. And I think we, like, in a lot of senses, we look at education as like, okay, there's this stuff on the outside that comes into our mind and then we assimilate it into us. And I think a much better way to look at education is to think there's something that we want to get out of us and we want to inform it. Like we want to be able to do this ambiguous thing. Our heart has some yearning, like I want to do something with music. I want to do something with drums. And rather than taking in 40 systematic rudiments, rather than trying to inform it with rudiments, it's much better to like feel what your heart wants and try to more inform that deliberate intention with something in your education. And it sounds subtle, but it's hugely different. It's like student-based.
I think I know where you're coming from. I taught high school for a while, and there's this monolithic approach that schools seem to take to teach such a diverse population. But you're not going to get the same results out of every student doing it that way. So if it's student-centered, then you're catering to the specific needs and desires of that student. If they're more engaged, they're going to contribute more, which means they're doing the inside-out kind of approach, I think. As opposed to, this is the facts of this, and these are the consequences of this action, and this is what you need to know for the standardized test. In education, it's much more meaningful if the student makes a connection with whatever the content is that you're trying to teach. And I think your approach is a good way to help them make those connections. You got to know what they're interested in, what motivates them. And the only way to do that is to know what they're feeling or what they're thinking, and that's an internal thing.
Man, yeah, and that's why you'll only get as good as you feel, because I feel like if drummers are constantly trying to go online and find these patterns or these exercises that they feel is going to be that next level key to accessing what they want, that's just backwards to me. Like really, I think you want to make it feel good, because if it feels good, you'll do it. And it seems almost overly simplified, and obviously that applies to a lot of things.
Sure.
But actually somatic experiencing and therapy, it has this idea of self-touch, like completing the sensation circuit. Like if you were to touch the wall, okay, I feel it on my fingertips, I have this sensation there. But when you touch yourself, you're feeling the sensation in your hand as well as in your body. And that's really a good way to bring us into our bodies. But I mean, there are certain lack of maturity elements that, touching yourself can be kind of it can get off topic. But I mean, man, I noticed I always loved playing on my leg and like playing on different parts. And like, even just, this is the ultimate sensation circuit. You feel the clap in both hands. And I mean, man, I feel like all drumming comes from this. Like if you can think and phrase and maintain this consistently, like I think this is like one of the best practices you can do as a drummer. Make sure that the width of each clap is the most consistent. Make sure that the time and the space and the sound are all consistent. And so if you can start there, then all you do is incrementally increase the difficulty level and complexity of whatever you're working on from that, and you'll always be in the pocket, rather than like, okay, I can clap, now I need to superimpose quintuplet and septuplet paradiddles, and blah, blah, whatever. I think you just like that. It's called titration in somatic experiencing, but just like constantly increasing the difficulty level so you stay ahead of like your thoughts of like, oh man, what did I do today? Or what am I worth? It's a meditative practice to stay ahead of your thoughts, the thoughts that plague us, the ones that are sort of beating the dead horse, the thoughts that we have, but staying behind your frustration level. And so like staying in that magic continuum of being in flow and being in the zone. I love the movie Soul, how it talks about like being in flow.
Soul.
I don't know if you've seen Soul. Oh, Soul is so good.
Okay, I'm writing this down because I'm going to watch it. Is it just Soul, like S-O-U-L?
Yeah, S-O-U-L. It came out last year. It's an animated film.
Okay, cool.
John Baptiste did the music for it. It's great. Roy Haynes played drums, and they actually like the animated character is playing what Roy Haynes played. It's so badass. Cool. But this idea of flow is and being in the zone, I guess another way. But finding that in your practice, like doing something that's like one level ahead of what's comfortable, but one level behind what's impossible. And like finding that space. And when you can find that, that's really when your inside is manifesting outward. And so, because a lot of people practice what they can already do and it's comfortable and it's sort of like, I don't know, it's kind of wastes your time.
It's kind of like going a couple grade levels above what you're capable of doing, like in terms of reading, for instance, to get a better grasp of a lexicon.
yeah, what you're comfortable doing, or like if you're beyond what you're even capable of doing, you can very much hit this wall like, oh my God, I suck, and this tension, then this whole like fight or flight thing comes in, and you start, oh man, I'm a total poser. I don't even belong where I am. Like you want to stay like behind where it becomes a frustration. And so finding out that middle ground between ahead of your thoughts and behind your frustration is how like that's the best practice, because then it still feels good to practice. You still feel fulfilled, and it's still autonomous. You're still kind of able to do things that interest you, but you are still limiting that to things that you're not comfortable doing. And so just finding that level, like that one step ahead of where you're comfortable. And I think that applies to everything.
You've really embraced the mind-body connection, and you've taken huge strides in connecting that to playing. And I say that because even just watching you do the hand clapping exercise thing just now, I think on some level I knew that about the connection, but to see it demonstrated so explicitly clear, it makes so much more sense to me. That's the kind of thing.
Oh, cool.
You can call it dumbing it down if you want.
Man, don't ever say dumbing it down. There's a term in progressive academics, the formative assessment. And so that's something that's really challenging for traditional minded teachers to grasp. And the formative assessment is the halfway point to the learning outcome.
Right.
So there's like, okay, there's the test, and the formative assessment is this thing that sort of makes sure you're on the right path.
Right.
It's a resource. What's the formative assessment? But the really heavy thing about that is sometimes the formative assessment is beyond your frustration level. Like even reaching the formative assessment, right? Okay, well, what's the formative assessment to that? Like I've been fucking around with left foot clave stuff and trying to be Horacio Hernandez. And I mean, you watch that guy play and there's like 8 million formative assessments between me and like trying to do that shit. But that practice of building those formative assessments, those halfway marks, and I think about it, like we all have the things we've thought about our entire lives and we bug ourselves with, and there's these internal dialogue narratives that they're always there and they always make us feel bad. And I'm just thinking, what if we were to replace all that bullshit that clouds our minds and fucks us up and replace it with focusing on formative assessing out our goals? And like, so I have this grandiose goal of being a speaker about somatic intelligence, how it applies to fulfillment and drumming. And I have this, my ideal now, instead of playing on a hit record or touring the world, would be hired somewhere to speak about how to apply these practices to our general lives and also how to apply them to ourselves as drummers and have some kind of crossover there.
There are musicians who tour and they'll sell and share and perform their music, but they do it as speakers and they talk about certain issues, but they're using music to reach people. You know Steve Gooding through, I don't know if you know him in person, but
yeah.
Him and I came up together. He has the Funding the Future organization, and their goal is to actually educate high school students on the importance of personal finance. But he does that by taking his band on the road, and he'll perform at these schools. So his tour is usually like a truckload of high schools, and they perform and he does these speaking engagements. So he might be a valuable resource for you.
I'd love to talk to somebody who's doing it. Hell yeah.
I don't think he'll mind if I connect you guys. So
I did a tour of the Midwest, and we played together at this club. And I remember liking his band, and I really liked him. He's a man.
He's super cool guy. Super sweet.
Yeah.
Van Halen's 1984 record had just come out on May 1st, which I think was a Friday. I saw him the weekend after that. And of course, I couldn't play like that, but I could stumble fingers my way through it. And he came in with his aunt, and he bought strings or whatever. And as he was leaving, I heard him say something like, I mean, he plays just like Van Halen to his aunt. And that was my introduction to him. And then he moved to Wichita a couple years after that. And we got together somehow. I think through his cousin, we hooked up and we just started jamming together. And we've been, friends ever since. He's such a prolific songwriter. I don't know how he does it. He's a great player too. Jesus.
I should connect with him again. We've had some conversations. We've bumped into each other in LA. We bumped into each other on this tour. Maybe that was probably like 2012 or so.
Yeah, he was in LA for a while. Yeah.
He's not anymore. Where is he?
He's in Nashville right now, I believe. You should connect with him. He's a good dude, man. He's a great player.
Okay. Cool.
What's next for you then? I mean, when am I going to see you again? You going to get out on the road soon, or are you going to put your speaking tour together? Let's do it right now. Get you speaking to our days.
My next step is to start loving our practice. It's somatic intelligence training to drumming. And it's based in somatic experiencing by Peter Levine. And so these ways that he connects people back with their intention is like these practices just have everything to do with drumming. And I feel like it makes it such a larger practice to practice drums this way, because it doesn't only make you a better drummer, but it just makes you enjoy life better. When you can really reduce these habitual tensions in your drumming, they manifest in so many other areas of your life. And then even like the symmetry of your dialogue with yourself, like, are you talking to yourself as an equal, or are you talking to yourself as hypermasculine posturer and submissive or whatever? And so I really feel like learning drums this way. I mean, because regardless of whether you ever make $1 playing drums or not, you can still use all these practice tools in your everyday life. And I even use them like handwriting, like trying to reduce every bit of tension in my hand and arm and still be able to write. And it's challenging. Or even brushing your teeth, like making sure the shoulder doesn't come up at all when you brush your teeth. Or else I notice, like, even drinking water, my shoulder will come up and my other hand will sometimes kind of be here, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Why is that necessary?
Yeah, I have not once considered my posture doing things like brushing my... The only time I ever considered that is you were telling me, let the stick work for you. And so you were showing me the right way to relax. I remember you showing me with your pinky stuck out. Your finger stuck out like that, you're not relaxed. I remember telling you, yeah, I keep dropping sticks. And you're like, well, then you're doing it right. I never really thought about that. But when I brush my teeth tonight, because I do brush my teeth, I'm going to think about that. To me, it's not only will you become a better drummer, but you become more fulfilled and maybe even a better person, because you're so much more self-aware. And at the same time, you're aware of the external components around you that influence you. You know what I mean? So it's like a quality of life kind of thing, more than anything.
Oh, it completely is. Yeah, it's the dojo idea. Like, you're not training in the martial arts to kick somebody's ass. You're training in the martial arts to be a better person. And it's really about the energy you put out. Like, I think if you're like constantly have this asymmetrical, like habitual tension in your body, like that is felt, whether it's stated or not, to everyone else. And if you can really approach something relaxed and symmetrical and have that energy exude, you're really going to find situations will find you, I think. And so in terms of sidemen, like, if you can really approach a situation with that relaxation level and make people feel like you're there for their best interest, then I think the gigs that you want will come to you. And I think that's why, like, we all know people, oh man, things just always work out for that person, but I think it's because they have this innate coming from the inside that attracts people. And so there are two things that I wanted to kind of wrap up with, I guess. And there's two tools that I use every day to try to be more embodied and try to really bring my sensation from my heart and my lungs and my stomach up and be informed through my brain and have that be the energy that people feel from me. And so one of them is grace. And I love grace because it's like, when I was a kid, I was Catholic, and you say grace before a meal. And I love graceful drummers. I mean, you watch Keith Carlock play and you're like, dude, that guy is fucking graceful. Like, I mean, he drops his arm and it just like a bouquet of sound comes out. I mean,
it's amazing. Fluid.
Yeah, it's so we take this acronym for grace. And so the first thing, before we do anything, we start with the G in grace, and that's being grounded. So the first thing, well, here we are, we're seated. So really feeling each butt cheek in contact with the chair.
Yeah, I'm on a drum throne right now. I'm getting into this.
Oh, sweet. Love it. I'm jealous. Yeah, and then feel both your feet on the ground and really feel this distribution of weight between your heel and the ball of your foot.
Okay, there's cords under my feet right now. Should I be worried?
Yeah, try to break that. It feels better. And so grounding. Okay, and now feel like gravity is pulling you down, centered into wherever you're in contact with the floor. And that's how we feel grounded. And so that's the G in grace. The next one is to be relaxed. And so the way that we achieve relaxation is about, like I've mentioned, about habitual tension, like try to remove all unnecessary tension. And this is a lifelong practice, but it's a good thing to just remind ourselves of. And so then the A in grace is be aware. Go through your 5 senses. Like, okay, what am I hearing? What am I seeing? What am I smelling? What am I tasting? What am I feeling? And so that's like, okay, okay, now we're at the C. The C is the one that's especially applies to the drums. That's centered, being centered, really being aware of this bilateral symmetry. This idea that if there's any sort of asymmetry in one area, it's going to be exacerbated and doubled because we're having to compensate on the other side. And so like approaching any action with being centered is also very important. Then we're finally, the last element of grace is E, which is to embody what we're about to do. And so embodying is the idea of letting our sensation drive our action, like really being in touch with letting like all these components come together and facilitate our inside, being expressed outward. And I mean, I'd like everything, brushing your teeth, drinking water, playing drums, communicating. Like if at first it's kind of like, okay, wait, now I'm G'ing. Okay, now I'm R'ing, I'm A'ing. I mean, it takes that. But I mean, if the more you do it, it'd be just like boom, 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 boom. That's how it happens. You're just like grounded, relaxed, aware, centered, embodied. And if like you can do that before everything you do, it eventually becomes part of who you are. And it's a challenge. But yeah, I mean, for playing an instrument, it's great. And you mentioned really posture. Cool. Yeah, and I like it because we all know the word grace, and that could kind of like associate the words, with this practice. And then the other thing is 3-dimensional breathing, which is another tool I use anytime I feel like, okay, I'm starting to get this funky feeling from my heart and my lungs, which has to do with ventral vagal, with the nerve, polyvagal theory. And then there's dorsal vagal, which is what applies to the stomach and kind of runs up the back of your neck. That has to more a feeling of disconnectedness. That's why you feel ulcers in your stomach when you're depressed. And so like there's all this sensation going on. And one way to sort of regulate that is to focus on breath, as you mentioned before. But the deeper part of how to do that takes us out of like, okay, am I breathing right? Am I not breathing right? Is this idea of 3-dimensional breathing. So you take your hand and put it on your chest and take your other hand and put it on your back. And so you're on either side of your lungs. Take a big breath in and feel that sort of forward and backward expansion, and then the inward compression. Expansion, compression, and really feel that direction. Now take the hands and put them on either sides of your, side here. Now expansion, compression. Expansion. Now that's great. Those are two that we're very comfortable with, the breathing, but there's a third dimension that a lot of us lack, and that's because our posture's often fucked up, and that's vertical. So take your, kind of feel your collarbone and then feel your belly, underneath your lungs.
Like under my diaphragm?
Yeah, under your diaphragm. And now breathe up and try to feel how your shoulders should come up a tiny bit. And in order for this to happen, the shoulders have to be back. Like a lot of us like to slouch forward.
Yeah, and that's my big deal.
Yeah, if you slouch forward, you're cutting off immediately, right off the bat, you're lopping off 25% of your lung capacity. Like the shoulders here compared to here, it's like a completely different level of breath you're capable of when the shoulders are back. And you can really feel that when you really dig into vertical dimension of breathing. And so, man, there's this brace. It's a posture brace. I wear it, and that forces the shoulder back. And when I was practicing with it, I noticed, what the fuck's happening? My mouth is dry in 2 minutes. And I drink a bunch of water, and I thought this brace was dehydrating me. But what it was doing, it was increasing 25% my breath, and I was drying out my throat.
From taking in...
Just because I was breathing. But it's man, that's freaking currency. That's oxygen coming in. And if you're stressed, and, we get stressed and tense, we're more inclined to keep dwindling down and trying to play. But man, if you always have access to that full capacity 3-dimensional breath, that is so powerful for overcoming anxiety and stage fright, or even an anxiety attack setting on. So anytime you feel anything that's more dorsal, more like you're feeling butterflies in your gut, and it's less like the heart variation, like things that are in the heart and lungs tend to be a little bit more interactive with people. You see attractive member of the opposite sex, it kind of the heart starts pumping. These are relaxed, there's this connection between heart and lungs, and a societal connection, and stomach, and being separated or feeling kind of constricted. Like these feelings can really affect our performance and our feelings of ourselves. And so these two tools, they make all the difference for me in how I approach life. So.
Yeah, it's funny you said. I never really thought about that. Like I was saying, when I brush my teeth tonight, or even when I take a drink of this, I'm going to think about that. And
try it right now. Take
okay.
that glass and try,
See, now I'm aware, so I'm making sure I
First, okay, you're about to drink. So now first ground yourself, then relax. Nope, don't even drink yet. I'm sorry to do this.
No, that's cool.
Like such a perfect. This is such a perfect example. So you ground your. I'm about to drink water. So I ground myself. I relaxed. I'm aware of what's around me. I'm centered. I'm about to embody myself drinking. Now pull it up to your mouth and notice if any. Do it slower and notice if there are any muscles that are engaging in your shoulder or your back or anywhere that are unnecessary to the act of drinking.
When I get about here, I can feel some tension on my lower right side. Because I'm leaning
mouth
forward.
Go forward? Yeah, does your mouth? Okay, so
I'm leaning into the glass instead of bringing the glass to me.
Yeah, don't do man, this is exactly it, man. I mean, this is totally so cool. It. Man, okay. This little tiny fraction that your chin goes forward throws your balance off, and suddenly that puts you into a sense of fight or flight, because our bodies are so reactive to our sense of being imbalanced. Like, I mean, as a caveman, like if we were imbalanced, like, oh my God, I might fall forward. I mean, there's like this sense of fight or flight in our autonomic nervous system that being imbalanced and not centered, not grounded, actually activates our anxiety. And so even this incremental little shift in your chin forward on some level is increasing your level of anxiety. And now as we're talking here, we're friends, everything's fine, you don't notice it. But when that happens in a pressure situation, that just it can really heighten your anxiety. And so even as something as simple as drinking water, if you can reduce those habitual tensions to zero, then when those pressure moments happen, when those first responder moments like the assailant you brought up happen, there's nothing for that anxiety to trigger in the body, because all that extraneous anxiety has been removed, all that tension. And so these are
totally cool.
Dude, this is so heavy, man. I wish I could have fucking talked to myself in 2010 when this accident happened, and I would have realized, wow, this tension that I'm experiencing is completely psychological. It has nothing to do with anything.
Well, that's one of the hallmarks of PTSD. You found a great way to harness that energy and turn the worst day into probably one of the best days.
Yeah, I always thought it was something I would have to hide about myself. I felt that it made me an imposter, like I had to falsify who I was to make up for this, impediment that I had. And now, wearing it on my sleeve, I've connected with so many people who feel the same. And I've talked to some musicians, drummers who have the biggest gigs in the world, and I wouldn't dare say who they are. But sure. They deal with these problems. And I'm like, man, if I can be a mouthpiece for them or for whoever is struggling with anxiety and doesn't know how to deal with it, because in our culture, there's just such a stigma around therapy and mental health. And man, any form of cognitive dissonance is a form of a mental health problem. I mean, it's like the difference between a scratch and a gaping open bleeding wound, cognitive dissonance versus complete schizophrenia or something. But I mean, it's to really know if we're cognitively dissonant about something, well, I do this, I know it's bad for me, but no. I mean, that's a disconnect between what the body's telling us and what our mind is trying to kid itself that it's in charge.
It seems like you're way ahead down the path on that journey, but that was fascinating. I enjoyed doing that little exercise just now. I'm not going to say I'm going to fully commit, but you really got me thinking. Actually, I should just commit.
Man, I don't want. Yeah, I mean, just put it in the background for now. Just know that that's one possible way of approaching anything. Wow, and it may or may not mean more as life goes on. I think as we get older and we feel a little bit more restricted by this kind of earth suit that, we carry our brains and body around in, I think it matters more and more. I think we're able to deal with a lot of these issues of anxiety when we're younger because our bodies are so resilient, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, a lot of old age, and particularly somatic therapy, has found that old age has less to do with degradation of the body and far more to do with just constant anxiety from the mind creating physical problems. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, yeah, man, I think you'll live longer and feel better and be happier the more you can reverse that privilege. Like, just try to privilege the body for a while. Like, give it, because I mean, at the heart of it, literally the heart, lungs, and stomach, there's the vagus nerve that runs from these three organs to our brain. And there are 80% more sensory nerves than there are motor nerves, which means there's
Did not know
80% of
that.
the information traveling is going to the brain and not from it. And so when you privilege the mind is left trying to maintain its privilege, like, dude, I got barely anything to say, but I'm getting all this feedback. I have to kind of make shit up. And so I think that's where, no, literally, that's where a lot of anxiety comes from. Like, your heart's like, okay, you're smoking cigarettes, you're causing me a problem. You're eating a lot of cholesterol. The lungs have a problem. Your stomach's having a problem. It's sending all this up, and your brain feels that, and then it has to associate something that the brain can understand that has to do with it. And so, okay, why do I feel bad? Okay, it has nothing to do with what these organs are telling me. It has to do with what I did yesterday or what somebody said to me or what. And so if you can really pay attention to what that sensation is and make the sensation a joy rather than, sending this negative information in your body talk, man, that just changes your life. It has for me, and it has for so many people involved with somatic therapy, because psychotherapy is so talk-based, it immediately involves another person in this narrative. And that can be really challenging for people to admit that vulnerability.
Right.
And it's a lot, talk therapy can be really challenging. You have to really trust your therapist. The therapist has to be great. They have, there's a lot of factors involved. But if we can befriend the nervous system and understand our sensations better, we can kind of circumvent that difficulty of expressing our trauma from our mind. And what neurological plasticity, this idea that our brains are much more fluid than we think, they are adaptable. And this strange how I was holding a memory from my 14-year-old self in my shoulder here, and it was manifesting in how I played the hi-hat. And so it's they're in music school, there was no fucking way that would have ever come up,
Yeah.
But when I really have been getting in touch with my body and how sensation, is kind of the root of it, and giving privilege to sensation over thought, then that's really, I think, when you can relax and let your heart do the talking.
It sounds like you've grown a lot, and it seems like you're in a good space, literally and figuratively and emotionally. And
man, thank you for being able to talk about it, because I need to talk about it. And if there are any people like I was in 2009, I feel like it's something that needs to be heard. There's this in this book I'm working on, this ebook. It's you can inhabit intention. That's what being embodied is in anything. If you really are inhabiting the intention of what's inside of you, that's great. But conversely, if you are in habit of being in tension, that's what constricts that. So and I like it because it's such a subtle difference. Inhabit intention, inhabit intention.
But it's a huge distinction.
I know it, but and it's the same thing. It's such a big deal with outside in versus inside out, and tiny little shifts in momentum or inertia or tension in your body, tiny little things that when they're corrected, they double your return on investment. And so, man, today I was practicing and 2 hours went by and I barely even noticed. It just felt so good. And
that's cool.
Yeah, it's man, I relish that.
Well,
and I wish that for all of us.
Yeah, I'm going to go on record and say this, and I'm going to make a commitment to you on this. I notice when I do these gigs, I tend to put a lot of my weight on my left foot. I come home and my shoulder hurts and my back hurts. And for years, I just thought, well, I'm over 50, so it's got to be that. But maybe it doesn't have to be that. So my pledge to you, I'm going to very conscientiously try and center myself. I'm going to let you know how that works out for me.
I've got better hit this 5 o'clock. But man, it's been awesome talking to you, Gino.
Yeah, likewise, man. Thanks for joining me, man. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, this has been great. Great to connect. I forgot we were doing a podcast. It's been a lot of moments like, oh man, just catching up with old friends. It's been awesome.
It's cool. Yeah, we should do this even when we're not recording. So,
Yeah.
I'll text you my number if you don't have it. Just chime in whenever, man.
Okay, cool, man. All right. Well, cheers. Best of luck to you and good luck with the podcast. It's been
great.
Thank you,
Adam. Thanks. We'll talk to you soon, brother.
Yep, sounds good. Yep, bye-bye.
All right. That's Adam Gust, everybody. Say good night.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.